Anita Krajnc is formerly a professor of political studies at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, but she's better known as the co-founder of Toronto Pig Save, an organization that bears witness to animals in their final moments as they approach slaughterhouses. Since 2010, the Animal Save movement has become a global phenomenon with 1,000 chapters in many different countries, and including now Climate Save, Youth Climate Save, and Health Save chapters, in addition to the Animal Save. The collective mission of the global Animal Save movement is to spread the idea that we all have a moral duty to bear witness, end animal agriculture, and reforest the earth. In 2019, Anita was named one of Toronto's most inspirational women, and she's here today to tell us about the Climate Save movement's new plant-based treaty project. Thank you so much for being here today, Anita.
Great pleasure, Janine. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're kind of a hero in our world, that's for sure. I really appreciate you taking the time. And so I always like to hear people's vegan story. How did that happen for you?
When I was an undergraduate, I saw a poster for the Animals film narrated by Julie Christie. And so I went to the basement library of Sigmund Samuel Library at the University of Toronto and saw the film. And I was an omnivore at the time. And I had nightmares for 3 days. And then I became a vegetarian and an animal activist in the 90s. But then it took me to 2004-05 when I was teaching. By then I had my PhD. I was teaching at Queen's University. And there was a student group that was they were influenced by Gary Francione. And they called me out. Like, I was working with them. I was distributing hundreds of copies of Peaceable Kingdom. And they said I was a hypocrite. And then I looked up, I started to learn about the dairy industry, and I was quite ignorant, and the egg industry, and then I went vegan. So that's my story. I went vegan around 2004-05.
And you became an activist when you were vegetarian still, though.
Oh yeah, I was the president of the University of Toronto Students for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. I was working on a campaign to get data on the number of animals used in experiments at the University of Toronto, and there were about 50,000 vertebrate animals and thousands of invertebrate animals killed each year. So it was just horrific. And I did a whole campaign where they wouldn't give me the information. Then I went to the ombudsperson, still wouldn't give me the information. Then I CC'd the press, and then eventually they released that information.
Wow. Yeah, it's all very hush-hush, isn't it? I've heard there's animal experimentation at the University of Victoria here. It's really hard to get any information about it, though. Yeah, so many different ways we can work to try to liberate the animals. And you ended up, I guess you never planned it, but somehow now you're sort of the head representative for the Save movement, one of them. And that came from a dog walk one day. So were you vegan at this point?
Yeah, so Toronto Pig Save started in 2010 with the adoption of Mr. Bean, a Beagle Whippet mix. He was adopted from Project Jessie of the Animal Alliance of Canada. Just a wonderful dog. I lived in this area, downtown Toronto, for 4 years prior, and I was aware of quality meat packers, quote unquote, pig slaughterhouse. And I could see the chimney in the distance when I took the streetcar, and I said, somebody should do something about it. And I even went to the extent of calling a group in Hamilton that was really active and said, oh, could you do a protest? And then I was starting to make plans to maybe leaflet, forgot about it, went on with my life. And then 4 years later, adopted Mr. Bean for my mom, Josie. And then I would take walks early in the morning. And that was the first time I saw transport trucks with pigs downtown Toronto. We'd take walks 7 a.m. I would see 8, 9 transport trucks in rush hour traffic. I saw the pigs looking out with their beautiful, sweet faces, and they were scared or just worried. And that's when it started. I said, okay, got to do something. I'd been reading books on Leo Tolstoy, Gandhi, Ramakrishna, and whenever there was an injustice in their community, they just took action. And so that was the idea of it wasn't passing the buck anymore like I had done 4 years ago. For 4 years, it was seeing the pigs, even at a distance, but seeing them, that was it. I said, okay, got to do something. I was trying to come up with a name. It's like, closed slaughterhouses and things like that. And then my friend said, no, you got to come up with like a positive name that's inviting. And she said, Toronto Pig Safe. I go, yeah, that's a good name. So we just, we went with Toronto Pig Safe. And then for half a year, we were trying to build the base and get footage. So we would sneak along the railway lines with many, many activists, wonderful activists, took footage of the pen area and also of the kill floor. There was a window that was open of the kill floor that showed the gas chamber.
Wow.
Got lots of footage for half a year. And then we started doing 3 vigils a week, every week, even during the holidays, Christmas holidays, other holidays, every single week. We did one on New Year's Eve because it fell on the day we wanted to do a vigil. So we did 3 a week to build a movement. And that started in July 2011. And then a few years later, that slaughterhouse closed. And then we went to Fearman's in Burlington, which is 40 minutes from Toronto. And groups started popping up elsewhere. We started doing vigils at the cow slaughterhouse in Toronto and the chicken slaughterhouse in Toronto. So yeah, and it spread.
That's so great. What a wonderful thing. And the power of bearing witness, I think that has a really long tradition in the resistance movement generally. I think the Quakers, that's one of their things, is to bear witness inside the prisons. They used to do that back in England, and when just deplorable conditions, and there's a real power in that, isn't there? I don't think people appreciate how powerful that can be.
It's transformative. I like animal rights was something that was really special to me and important to me. When I was teaching at the university, I incorporated it in every course. There was something that it was so central to me because the animals are such underdogs. They're so violated. They're so oppressed. They're so innocent. And so it always was important to me. But when I started bearing witness, like went right up to the truck, looked at the pigs in the eyes, it's completely transformative. It made fighting for animal rights the #1 priority in my life. And people have experienced that with bearing witness in the civil rights movement, or if it's worker rights or protests against nuclear testing. If you bear witness firsthand, it's different from watching a movie because you're there face to face. There's accountability. There's they become part of your life. The animals that are victims, their story becomes part of your story. It changes your brain structure in a way. The empathy is so humongous. And that's why we would say once we started bearing witness, if everybody saw this would stop. If everybody saw this, they wouldn't contribute to this evil. This violence, this killing, this torture. So we always said everyone has a moral duty to bear witness because we knew the power of it. I mean, Greenpeace had been, it started in Canada, in Vancouver, with Don't Make a Wave in the late 60s. And they were protesting nuclear testing in Apchipka in Alaska, and then and then in the Pacific. And, when you bear witness to something as evil as nuclear weapons or, bombing or things like that, it's transformative. And then they did that for the seal hunt and for whaling. And and it's a Sea Shepherd Society does that. And, it's a very, I just believe everyone should do it. We have a moral responsibility to not look away. And we were very inspired by Leo Tolstoy. He was an ethical vegetarian, the Russian writer, famous for War and Peace and Anita Krajnc, but he wrote 600 books and articles and became an ethical vegetarian in the 1880s. And he said what was the perfect definition of bearing witness in my mind. He said, when the suffering of another creature causes you to feel pain, don't succumb to the initial desire to flee from the suffering one, but on the contrary, come closer, as close as you can to him and try to help him. And so that idea of coming as close as you can and trying to help is just the core of what bearing witness is. And we're aware that most of the time we're just doing partial bearing witness, we're coming somewhat close as close as we can, and we're trying to help. In some cases we do rescue animals, but a partial bearing witness is better than looking away. And and that's the point that we make. The problem is so big, almost 1 billion land animals killed in Canada a year. and 10 billion in the US, and more than 70 billion land animals in the world each year, and over 2 trillion fish and marine species. So there are lots of opportunities to bear witness, and it may seem overwhelming, but just by being there, it becomes real. Like you say, okay, one truck has 200 pigs. Okay, there are 50 trucks going to Fearman's, the biggest pig slaughterhouse in Ontario. That's that's 10,000 pigs killed a day. It's like a village. But it puts it in perspective and say, oh, in a year, that is, 1 to 2 million. Like so those big numbers become real. So in Canada, we kill, 30 million pigs a year. Well, you see it, how just by bearing witness at an all-day vigil, you see the 50 trucks and you go, oh, this is how it happens. It's not abstract. And the problem with these things being abstract is people just, they just look away, or they think, oh, we can't do anything. It's not true. We have so much power to make a difference, and to help people do the right thing, to bear witness, to go vegan, and to become activists.
And for those pigs in their final moments, all right, they get to see. I haven't even been to a vigil, and I can just imagine it must be like really feel wonderful that in their final moments you've given them some love, and then eventually you started giving them some water. But it must also be really tragic knowing what they're heading into.
Yeah, I think it's like they have companionship with each other. Like that's what we've seen in the trucks. Like they help each other. If an animal's injured, they take care of each other. They have their friendship. But in terms of humans, they haven't met very many kind humans in their life, or humans that look them in the eye and with kindness and love and compassion. And so why it's important, because we're there, we're saying we're sorry, we love you, we're trying, and we're going to share your story. We're going to try to help you and other pigs coming later, that they don't have to suffer the fate that you're suffering. We want to make sure that you don't die in vain. Nobody wants to die in vain. Everyone wants justice. And I find pigs and other animals are very ethical, and that we have a lot to learn from them.
Yeah, and remembering that each of those, however many millions and billions, they're each one of them has their own personality, right? And we know that any of us that's had a companion animal in our lives, we know every single one of us, we're all individuals. And can you just briefly describe what kind of a death these creatures are facing? So regardless, I think we can assume that all of these pigs in this transport truck have come from maybe different circumstances. Maybe some of them lived better lives than others, but they're all heading into the same slaughterhouse. And can you just tell us what happens inside of there with the gas chambers?
Yeah. So first of all, the vast majority, like more than 95%, come from horrible factory farms where the mother pig is basically raped and impregnated repeatedly, like 6 months, like every 6 months. Like it's a horrific death. They're so intensively abused that they go to slaughter at 3 to 4 years. But if they're at a sanctuary like the pig preserve, they could live 16 years, 20 years. Like, so what we find with these farmed animals, they're so exploited and abused that they go to an early death, whether it's a mother cow going 4 or 5 years instead of living her 20, 30 years, whether it's a hen being quote unquote spent after a couple of years instead of living 10 years, and pigs living longer lives. So the poor piglets are taken away from the mother. The mother can't even turn around or move in a farrowing crate. Like, it's unimaginable. Like, that's one of the worst nightmares people have, because they don't want to be confined where you can't even turn around. Like, it's just like a nightmare from day one. Then they become feeder pigs, and they're fattened. And within 4 to 6 months, they get electrically prodded onto a transport truck, and it's the first time they see daylight, because they've been raised in a dirty, dark warehouse that looks like a concentration camp. And then they're electrically prodded, which is an instrument of torture, onto a truck. They're screaming, in the heat. They suffer so much. Like, their heart is the size of our fist, but they have such a big body because they've been artificially sort of fattened with no exercise. And so a lot of them in the summer, a lot of them die of heart attacks, and they get stroke, heat stroke. And then they're on this journey with no water and food for, it's 35 hours for pigs, but I think it's been lowered slightly with the new regulations. But 1 hour is enough to feel heat stroke if we're out there in heat. And then they're violently prodded into the slaughterhouse. And if it's hot, they're prodded even more mercilessly because they can, they're already injured and sick, and then they're even more prodded, even tortured more. Then they go into the slaughterhouse pen where thousands of pigs are there, and then they hear the screaming. They hear the screamings of the pigs being electrically prodded to the gas chamber. And so it's like an asylum there. So all day they're hearing this screaming until it's their turn, and then they're separated from the pigs that they were with. And then there's like a single file. They go into this single file where there's men, usually men, spaced out, and then it electrically prod them, so they race towards the gas chamber. And then 2 to 3 go into the gas chamber is made by Butina, a company in Denmark. They make 90% of the gas chambers in the world. And so they go 2 to 3, and then they are lowered because they're lowered and poisoned by carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air, so the pigs are lowered down a few floors, and so they're jumping on each other, trying to put their snouts out, trying to breathe. They're screaming, and eventually that stuns them because they don't want to kill them. They want to stun them so that then they're shackled upside down. Then their throats are slit, so they want them alive so the heart can pump out the blood. And then some of them wake up. Even the industry admits this, like a few percent wake up, and then they're thrown to a scalding tank to remove their hair, and some of them are alive when swimming, trying to swim out. So what humans do it's quite unforgivable. It's quite evil. When you think of like how people prepared for war or genocide, what we're doing for animals, it's thought out, it's mathematical, it's all calculated. And it's truly, there are no words for it. And I think people just aren't even aware. Like, this is happening in their backyard. I live in Toronto. I live 5 minutes away from what used to be the pig slaughterhouse, and this was happening there. And I didn't know. And I was a vegan. I was an animal activist. I only found out when I started bearing witness. So that means I was ignorant for all those years that I was vegan. That's why it's important to bear witness, because we don't even know what's going on until you start paying attention and stop looking away and stop saying, oh, somebody else should do something. If this was happening to you and you're screaming for help and you're saying, please help me, you don't want humans looking the other way, and saying there's more important things. What is more important than, preventing murder and torture and exploitation in your own backyard and around the world? But in your backyard, it's happening right where you live. There are so many slaughterhouses right in the city. Like in Toronto, we still have a cow slaughterhouse where there's torture. Like Linda McQuaig, a famous journalist, wrote in the Toronto Star the kind of torture that was happening, because there's a kosher halal slaughterhouse, and they're like the throat is slit without any studying. So there's even more torture there. But at the end of the day, it's all horrific and bad and wrong, and we need to shut down all slaughterhouses.
And who are the people working in these slaughterhouses? I think we can have a little bit of sympathy for the idea that we live in a world where this is a job that's available to people who maybe can't get jobs elsewhere. Do you ever have a chance to chat with some of the workers?
Yeah, it's very much the story sort of has repeated itself for centuries and even millennia. So there's a book called Utopia, where the world's a utopia, but there's still slaves, and the slaves slaughter animals. And then Upton St. Clair wrote The Jungle, and that was at the turn of the 20th century, and it was the newest immigrants. So it was like immigrants from, it was immigrants from Eastern Europe and African Americans. And now currently, if you go to the United States, a lot of, Latin American people or people from the Middle East. And there's so many methods that these industry use to trap people in this. Like it's their way of getting citizenship. Like it's just like they, either, go to war for us or, work in the slaughterhouse. Like it's really unethical. It's extremely unethical and exploitative. And the same is true in Canada, like in Alberta. Like in a lot of cases, it's programs, where people are able to get into Canada, but to work at slaughterhouses.
Wow.
So it's incredibly unethical.
At what point did you start giving water to the pigs?
It took a while. It took maybe, I don't know, a year and a half. So there was an activist, Paul, who said, "Oh, let's give them fruit." So he suggested it, and once he brought fruit to the cow slaughterhouse, and they weren't. They're so terrified that rarely have we been successful in giving an apple or some water to cows. They're just so petrified. They don't. So then at the cow vigil, we were doing vigils on hot days, and people said, we should give them water. And we still didn't. Twyla Francois, said you should give them, like, you should have a hose there and spray the whole truck. And we were thinking, oh, well, what are the legal ramifications? Like, so at first we were afraid. And then we just started doing it once. And then once you do it and you say like, oh, this is so obviously the right thing to do. And then everybody just does it. So then we just started doing it. Even the police would come sometimes and said, you can't do that. We're going, oh, well, we'll just look at them. They're so thirsty and we're giving water. So like once we started, we overcame that fear. So we went through this process of, once it was so obviously the right thing to do that we did it. And yeah.
That's what ended you up in the courtroom, isn't it? Was the water component?
Yeah, because they knew how powerful it was to show the world how thirsty these pigs were. What's the difference between a dog and a pig? They knew. So the slaughterhouse wanted to stop that. So that's why they wanted to make an example of me, but other people were giving water too, just to try to shut us down, and stop doing that. And but then I got two very amazing lawyers, vegan lawyers, Gary Grill, and Gary, and they were amazing, and James, Gary Grill and James, they were amazing, and they turned it around. It was a 1.5-year trial, became known as the pig trial, and they put animal agriculture on trial, and they called all these witnesses, like a veterinarian, a scientist, Dr. Laura Marino, specializing in pig sentience, a doctor who would talk about the health benefits of plant-based as compared to a meat, dairy, and egg diet, and then an environmentalist, Dr. Tony Weiss from University of Western Ontario. So they all testified, and it became a big story worldwide because it was so outrageous to charge someone for compassion. So we use the hashtag compassion is not a crime.
Cool. And I wonder, now that we've got these ag-gag laws and legislations coming in across the country, do you think that's a different way that the industry has responded to all our efforts, and especially the Save movement? Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's an ag-gag bill in Ontario that outlawed giving water to pigs. Well, yeah, they try to get us through an Ontario law. So, the constitutionality of that bill is being challenged by an amazing group of lawyers at Animal Justice.
Cool. Yeah, they're a great organization for that sort of thing. And sadly, I think we need to honor Regan Russell, who was part of the Save movement. And I've heard that there is some ongoing investigation into her death as she was bearing witness. Is there anything you can tell us?
Yeah, so Regan Russell she came to some of our Toronto Pig Save vigils, but they were on weekdays. So she often went to, there's another group called Don't Make Stop the Trucks, that she would go to the Sunday vigils because Sunday was easier for her because she's looking after her aged mother and father. And so, but she came to some of our vigils weekdays, and she came on a Friday right after, the day after the Ag bill was passed in Ontario. And she was protesting it. Do you know the irony of that? Like she was planning to do something more to fight this bill. So she told Laurie Croonan, her good friend, who was coordinating the vigils for Toronto Pig Save, that she was willing to get arrested with her 90-year-old father to fight this bill. So the day after the bill passed, she was at an emergency vigil. It was a hot day, temperatures in the high 20s. It was a vigil. It was a vigil to protest the Ag bill. So it was a Friday, and yeah, it was the last truck. The last truck. It was owned by Brussels trucking company. The driver was sitting in the outer lane for minutes, sort of encouraging activists to cross into the street, and it was just like he was looking for a fight or something. And the vigil was over, and then there was a green light. She had the right of way, and he just put his foot on the pedal and ran over her. And she was a beautiful soul. Like, she was such a good heart. She would always try to bring people together, try to heal, she was very positive. She was very kind. Like, for new activists, she would give them a ride. She would bring them, vegan brownies, like people she barely, she just met. Like, she was incredibly kind. And she was involved in so many different social movements. And it's been more than a year, and her husband and family are really upset because over a year and there was nothing happening. And then the first court appearance was supposed to be a few weeks ago, but then the judge got ill. Now the next one is going to be where actually the trial starts is November 1st, but that's like, she was killed in late June, and it's more than a year of 2020, and now it's more than a year, and the reasoning they gave, oh, it's COVID, and the charges were just like careless driving, which is a highway traffic offense, and it wasn't a Criminal Code of Canada violation. And yet most cases where people are run over, it's a criminal code offense, and especially should be true for a professional driver. If you are a transport truck driver, you have higher requirements in terms of safety. And for that to happen under the circumstances of him sitting in the outer lane for so long, and her having the right of way, they have video testimony, which they did not share with the family. They have on Fearman's pig slaughterhouse, they had a video pointing there. So they had video evidence, but they didn't share it with the family or the public. So like, yeah, there are a lot of it's very, they didn't even take his cell phone after this. Imagine anyone else, this happening to anyone else, they would take the cell phone. Was the guy texting when this was happening? What was he texting before?
Right.
Like, he didn't even take a breathalyzer. Like, it was like unbelievable. It was like a different justice system. Or animal egg. Like, it's truly reprehensible. But the world responded. Joaquin Phoenix came to the site where she was killed, and that would have meant a lot to Regan, because Regan told her best friend, Catherine Whiteman, that when Joaquin Phoenix was speaking at the Academy Awards, not about himself or his movie, The Joker, he was speaking about mother cows and how important it is to drink plant-based milks instead of exploiting the dairy cows. She called her friend, and she was speaking so fast she couldn't understand what she was saying. She was so excited. She was so happy what Joaquin Phoenix did, and to know that he then came to the site where she was killed. She was smiling in heaven, and there were protests all over the world for her. And so many people who were not active but cared about animal rights became active for her. So she lives on in so many people. I can't even begin to tell you what a difference she's made to the strength of the movement.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, let's shift gears. I mean, I've heard about animal sanctuaries named after her and animals named after her, and yeah.
There's so many rescues in her name. People did special rescues in her name all over the world.
Wow.
Like lambs, chickens, pigs. PETA worked with Sanctuary to like rescue some pigs in her name. Uh, um, yeah, all over the world, people asked for animals just for her, like in Portugal, Spain, Italy, like all over Mexico, like rescues for her in her name that were in addition, something just for her. They just were determined to do rescues for her.
Right. Wow. Wow. Well, we'll have to keep an eye out for news of the trial then, and hope there's some justice there. So the Save movement then, the animal Save movement has now added components. In addition to the animal component, there's the climate, the youth climate, and the health save movements. This is very exciting. I'll tell you that I became a vegetarian originally for environmental purposes, so that's always very near and dear to my heart. So the plant-based treaty is very exciting. And was that your idea, Anita?
So what happened in late April, Janelle, who is Genesis Butler's mother. Genesis Butler is an African-American youth, I think she's 14 now, who started Youth Climate Save. Her mother, Janelle, and Nicola Harris, who's our communications director, and I went on a call with Sephora Berman. So Sephora Berman is a hero of mine, like from the environmental movement. I got arrested under her leadership when she was blockade coordinator in Clackwood Sound.
Okay.
Forest campaign in 1993, and then the Great Bear Rainforest campaign in 1997 when she was with Greenpeace. And so she was always a hero of mine because she was like a strong sort of eco-feminist and doing the right thing to save old growth forests. And then recently I called her, like I said, like, oh, can you give us advice on how to put animal agriculture on the agenda? And I invited two powerhouses like, Nicola Harris, who was with SHAC in England, and now she's with, that's Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty. And now she's with Animal Safe Movement as Director of Communications, along with James O'Toole. And she's brilliant. She's one of the best campaigners I know on the planet. And so I wanted her to be there. And then I invited Janelle. Janelle is related to Cesar Chavez, who started the United Farm Workers and was a vegan and is Genesis' mother. Anyway, so she's a really good organizer. So I wanted them to be there with Sephora because she's just a big hero of mine. And so she showed us the fossilfueltreaty.org, and because she chairs that. And it's signed by over 100 Nobel laureates. It's the Dalai Lama signed it, and it's a bottom-up campaign to pressure national governments to negotiate a global fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. And then we were like, after the call, my head was spinning, like it was just like exploding, like with all these, because she said, you've got to focus on governments because they're the most powerful actors. And then after the call, we said, okay, what do we do? And then we just said, okay, let's do a plant-based treaty. So this happened in late April of 2021. So within 4 months, we were able to launch the plantbasedtreaty.org because we had a great model. So we are constantly looking at their ideas because they're so brilliant. And the environmental movement has thousands of times more resources than the animal movement. So we need to learn from them and, not reinvent the wheel. And so we're constantly like using their fossil fuel treaty as a model. So for example, just recently, like for COP26 or the Conference of the Parties, they have an interfaith letter, a youth letter, a scientist letter, and a politician's letter. And guess what? We have those 4 letters. We did 4 letters like that too. So yeah, we're always like learning from them and, on how to effectively try to shift the world to, a sustainable, fossil fuel free and plant-based food system.
It's always been amazing to me how there's this kind of disconnect between environmentalists and vegans. It's really rare to find active environmentalists who are also vegan, and I really was grateful for Cowspiracy when that came along. I think that helped shift some people over, but still there's this major gulf. So do you feel like the plant-based treaty is going to also help people who are active in the environmental scene realize the impact of animal agriculture?
Yes. but I think it's a two-way street. So what I think is happening is the environmental movement thinks that the overwhelming percentage of greenhouse gas emissions come from fossil fuels. So they actually believe the old FAO numbers, Food and Agriculture Organization numbers, which say 14%, which is still huge. But when they think of fossil fuels, they think, oh, it's 86% and animal ag is just 14%. It's not that significant. We got to focus on fossil fuels. Not true. Those are old numbers. Then on the animal rights side, people think, oh, it's animal agriculture. It's mainly animal agriculture. And if you're an environmentalist and you see that, you think, no, they're wrong. We're right. So I think there's these two camps and we have to stop that. And if you talk to when we did the treaty, we were working with two vegan IPCC, that's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change scientists, who were expert reviewers for the very prestigious, IPCC. So we were working with Dr. Peter, Carter. Yeah, exactly, from British Columbia, and Professor Danny Harvey from the Department of Geography at the University of Toronto. And Peter Carter is very clear. He says there are two main causes of the climate crisis: fossil fuels and animal agriculture. And he said, use the IPCC. It's not perfect, but it's getting better. And he says the science is getting worse and worse in terms of what's happening to the earth every day. And the IPCC says that 35% of the emissions come from the food sector. So don't use old FAO numbers. A majority of the food sector emissions are from animal agriculture. That's just greenhouse gas emissions. That's not counting opportunity costs, like all the land that's being used for grazing and growing animal feed. Then the problem's even bigger. But the point is, and then there's three greenhouse gases, and they're all very significant, like carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. There are others, but in terms of those three big ones, all of them are accelerating. Emissions are going up or higher and higher. And there's a methane emergency. And the IPCC, or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, came out with its sixth assessment report. They started coming out with reports in 1990. This is its sixth major assessment. And they said that 30% of methane emissions come from animal agriculture. So wow. It's very significant. And there's a methane emergency. If we don't deal with methane in the next few years, we're likely to go over some major tipping points and end up with a climate catastrophe. So we have to address animal agriculture and fossil fuels. So my point is, we need to work together. And when we did the plant-based treaty, we always say, let's address fossil fuels and animal ag. We don't just say, animal ag is the most important thing. We don't say that. We say both. And we're trying to get Greenpeace to endorse. We haven't been able to reach them yet, but we did get Extinction Rebellion Argentina to endorse. We got Fridays for Future in some countries to endorse. We're trying to get to Greta somehow to reach her. But we got Friends of the Earth in Hull, UK to endorse. So we have, we're reaching out to environmental groups, and we're gonna reach out to Indigenous groups and human rights groups, climate justice groups. This is for everyone, including animal farmers, because we won't be able to breathe soon if we continue on the trajectory that we're on.
Well, and I think a little bit of the good news is that methane we can tackle that in a few short years. Like methane doesn't stick around quite as long as these other gases. Is that right?
Yeah, so methane's half-life is like 10 years or 10, 12 years, whereas for carbon dioxide, it could have a global warming potential of 100 years. A certain percentage of carbon dioxide sticks around for 1,000 years. So it's a more long-lived gas. So if we address methane, we could put a real dent in, stopping the emergency. So there is a recognition that there is a methane emergency. So a week before that IPCC report came out, The Guardian published a big article about the methane emergency. And President Biden in the US is talking about a methane agreement, but it's very weak. But it has reached people's radar.
Well, thank goodness, and that's great. I mean, we got to get on this fast. I first heard about this back in, I was in college in 1989, 88, and it was an ecology professor who had just been away at some kind of science seminar with what he described as white coat scientists. So not just hippie, earth-loving tree huggers. These were, he said they were credentialed, and they told him and everybody there that we had 30 years to get a grip on the environmental problems that they were seeing at that time, which included global warming, greenhouse gases. Those were the words that were being bandied about at that time. And if we didn't do something within 30 years, we probably would see some significant and unalterable changes by 50 years. So that was 89. So here we are, 30 years later, seeing that play out, that we're definitely seeing big changes now, and we haven't really gotten a grip on anything in that time, it seems to me. So thank you for all that you're doing. And now, what is COP26? I mean, to be honest, Anita, through the years, Greta has just been such a wonderful spokesperson for environment. I wish she'd talk about veganism more, because we know that she's vegan. And she, I just figure if this, and then previous to her, there was David Suzuki's daughter, Severin, who had spoken at one of these. And they're so inspiring, and they get big news, and there's all a buzz for a bit. And then it kind of fades. And I don't know, I've sort of lost faith in these big organizations. I like that the plant-based treaty is being adopted by city governments and communities. I feel that's really where our power is. But power to you for going to the COP26. Who is the COP26?
Great question. And you mentioned 1989. Could it have been 1988 as well? When you were
around in there. Yeah.
Okay. There was a Toronto conference called Changing Atmosphere, which I attended. I was an undergrad. I attended. And that was just the year just before the creation of the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, created to do assessments on the science, looking at peer-reviewed articles around the world. It's the most prestigious, large-scale assessment of science. So the IPCC set up 3 working groups. The first is on science, second is on impacts, and third is on policy responses. So this is my PhD thesis. You can see it here. It's green learning. And I have a chapter on IPCC and how they formed. And just to go back to your point about the predictions that they were making then. So the IPCC, just before I get to the COP, the Conference of the Parties, the IPCC was the first body that was set up. So they said in their first report, they predicted an increase in temperature of 1 degree Celsius by 2025. So guess what? It's 2021. We're already past 1 degree Celsius. We're at 1.1 degrees Celsius warming, which is a really alarm bell should be going on. And 3 degrees Celsius before the end of the 21st century. So the way we're going, it could be much worse, but I just wanted to take note. When they set up these 3 working groups, they made sure that a British scientist would head working group 1. Working group 2 was headed by the Soviet Union. Subsequently, a couple of years later, the country sort of disintegrated and became a lot of different countries. And then the third working group, the policy responses, was chaired by an American. And then they had published a second assessment report in 1995, and then another one, and then a few others, and then the 6th one came out this year, as I mentioned earlier, the 6th assessment report of the scientific working group. The other working groups also have their own assessments coming out. So the response strategies, I think, is coming out early next year. So keep an eye out for that. And there's some pressure to delete the plant-based recommendations. So you always keep up, or just to water it down, because the reports look at peer-reviewed articles, but then governments approve the report. So it's a mix of science and government. So it's a very establishment thing. And if you read George Monbiot, just show you this book. He wrote this book called Heat. One of the things that a big oil company did was when Bush took over the presidency, said, "Oh, change the chair." Watson was the chair of the third working group. Change it with this person, and then the Bush administration did that. So like you can see how IPCC is very credible, but there's political interference, and you got to keep an eye on that. But even like if you look at the latest IPCC report, it's very devastating. It says like we are heading for 1.5 degrees Celsius warming by 2030, 10 to 20 years earlier. We're heading for 2 degrees Celsius warming by 2040. And there's an agreement that would be that would be a catastrophe. Like even where we are now is catastrophic, but surpassing the 1.5. See, the Paris Accord said do not go above 1.5, but we're already heading there. So that gives you some background. So there's the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it has those 3 working groups, and it comes up with assessment reports. And then they said, okay, let's set up a framework convention on climate change. And that was finally passed in 1992 at the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit. And so out of that convention came the Conference of the Parties. So the Conference of the Parties, their job, and I'm looking at this book called Survival Emissions, says basically their job is they are to promote the effective implementation of the Climate Convention. And so they're the supreme body of the convention established under Article 7.
So that the United Nations established that?
Well, yeah, the world governments agreed and signed the Framework Convention on Climate Change at the Earth Summit. But it was, the United Nations was, the United Nations Environment Program, the World Meteorological Organization. They were all part of setting this up, as well as they helped set up the IPCC. But it's intergovernmental. So it's like all these governments coming together and agreeing. When you look at the IPCC, the makeup of it, it isn't so much government bureaucrats because they're not the big experts. A lot of governments recruit professors to be part of the recruitment process. So as I mentioned, like Professor Danny Harvey at the Department of Geography at the University of Toronto, he was part of the IPCC expert review, and Dr. Peter Carter's part of it. So it's a very esteemed, group, but it has some limitations. Like I said, it is vulnerable to political influence, interference, and also quote unquote conservative, defined as like underestimating the danger. So, like, for example, the most prominent climate scientist in the world is James Hansen, and he wrote a book called Storms of My Grandchildren. And he was the head of the Goddard Institute of Space Studies. He's really esteemed. He was the one that blew the whistle in 1988 in front of a Senate hearing. And Al Gore features him in his film An Inconvenient Truth, which won a Academy Award, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. But anyways, he's highly featured, and he's the most famous scientist. He even stands up, and he gets arrested for standing up for climate. But he says the IPCC is conservative because they don't look enough at positive feedbacks. So there's too much linearity assumed, like, oh, things are getting worse in a linear way, but there could be actually blips, like shocks to the system where things get really bad, and positive feedback loops take effect. That just leads to huge catastrophe. For example, say a lot of methane is released from the permafrost in northern Canada and Russia, and then suddenly the methane concentration in the atmosphere is so much higher that it's not a linear process of increasing temperature. Say the temperature suddenly goes up by a few degrees, and then that's like runaway climate change. So there are these dangers, and they're so hard to predict because it's such a complex system. But he has a chapter, James Hansen has a chapter in the book called The Venus Syndrome. And like Venus is like burning hot, boiling, several hundred degrees Celsius, because their atmosphere is so concentrated with greenhouse gases. And
Yep.
there's a danger that that could happen to us. So like uh, it's just like it's climate chaos is a huge threat, like global nuclear war. It could lead to extinction of
Yeah.
all the planet.
Yeah, we have lots of different ways to get to extinction, it seems like these days. Um, but we do have power. We have power to become vegan. We have power to work for divestment of, the fossil fuel environmentalists have done great work getting universities to divest from investing in fossil fuel companies. And there seems to be extra barriers for trying to shift people away from eating animals, though. It's such an emotional attachment for people personally. And then also, you mentioned that governments sort of have to get the final say on these. And governments, we know, are invested in propping up animal agriculture. So there's a financial investment, right? To me, that seems a conflict of interest.
I think in the fossil fuel industry, it's the same thing. There's incredible subsidies that are going
True.
into propping up the fossil fuel industry, and so that's the challenge we have is ending subsidies to destructive fossil fuels and animal agriculture, and shifting subsidies to promote solutions like soft energy and conservation
Right.
and plant-based food systems. So
Yeah.
in the treaty, we have three demands. Don't make the problem worse. So no new deforestation for animal agriculture, no new slaughterhouses, no new animal farms. And then the second one is redirect subsidies, taxes, public information campaigns, all the tools you have so that they're promoting the solution. And the third demand is a restore, reforest the earth. So there are three R's: relinquish, no more, don't make the problem worse, no new slaughterhouses and so forth, redirect, and then restore.
Wonderful. And so, how can people get involved in helping you promote the plant-based treaty? Because you want it at all levels of government and all over the world. How can people get involved with that?
I think we'd love your help. The first thing you can do is just go to the homepage of plantbasedtreaty.org, and you can endorse as an individual, group, business, or city. And then we have a take action page where there's so many actions you can take part in. You can write to your councillors and mayor. There's a letter that goes, based on your postal code. It will go directly to your mayor and city councillors, and you can ask them the city where you live to endorse the treaty. Then we have like 4 letters, like youth letter, interfaith letter, scientist letter, politician letter. If you can help us, gather signatures, if you are part of a faith group, or if you're a youth, 25 years or younger, up to 18 to 25, basically, you can sign that letter to COP, the Conference of the Parties 26. That's the 26th meeting of the Conference of the Parties.
Wow.
Negotiate the Framework Convention on Climate Change, and ask them to, negotiate a global plant-based treaty. You can go to fossilfueltreaty.org and please, endorse that treaty and be part of that. Animal Save Moon has endorsed that. Plant-based treaty has endorsed that treaty. I just think we all need to work together. And then we have on the campaign hub, we have a lot of tools there. There's tools on how to lobby your politicians, how to write a letter to the editor. There's a draft resolution for cities to endorse the treaty. So you can present that draft to your councillor and say, hey, could you introduce this motion for our city to, support this treaty? We have things that others can do besides government. So we have 18 things you can do at school, 14 things schools can do, 16 things businesses can do. So we have all these other guides. And then you can also set your own goals in the campaign hub, where we ask you how many individuals can you ask to endorse, how many groups, and so forth. So, you can become part of it. And we have a Slack channel for plant-based treaty so that we can communicate with each other. And then we also have social media for plant-based treaty. So we have like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And on our campaign hub, you can download graphics, posters, banners, stickers, so there's a wealth of sort of resources there. And it's about acting individually, but also acting, as a family, as a community, as a group. We need campaigns in different cities to pressure cities to endorse. So you can help, start a city campaign. We can put you in touch with others in your city who have endorsed. So, we'd love Vancouver and Toronto and LA and Mumbai and, Buenos Aires, all these cities around the world to endorse this treaty. This month, we're focusing on Glasgow. So we have a petition asking Glasgow councillors and the mayor to endorse, because that's where COP26 is being held this year. So we think, Glasgow should be an example and should endorse the treaty. In England, there are a lot of cities that have a lot of green councillors, like Brighton, Bristol, Edinburgh. Like, there's a lot of cities that are very progressive and concerned about the environment. So we're going to target that after this month.
Great. What a wonderful campaign. And you get to make a whole bunch more new friends around the world. It's wonderful. All right. Is there anything that you want to say before we go about the movement generally, or what you've learned along the way, or just to inspire us as we go, Anita?
Yeah, I think the animal state movement is just over 10 years old, and we've been bearing witness, which is very traumatic for us. But the animals feel trauma day one, the day they're born, the day they die. Like, it's like a life of trauma. And when you bear witness, you absorb some of that trauma, but it's just like a small part. But for us, for humans, it's so devastating. Like, oh my God, this is so traumatic. But bearing witness is that, because that's how you change the world, because you have to shine a light on what's happening to them. So I do think we have a moral responsibility to do it, but it comes at a cost. But social change has always come at a cost. So so that's that. But then now we have the plant-based treaty, and I feel that it offers balance, because we're working on the solution. So just for our movement, I can't say how helpful it's been to focus on, system change as well as individual change and plant-based solutions. And the thing is, the climate crisis is an existential crisis. And so it's very important. So I think for our movement, like, we're beginning to focus much more on the plant-based treaty, because we feel that, we can make more progress, and that the crisis is existential. So I think bearing witness will always be important, but in terms of our time and resources, we are now putting the majority of that towards the plant-based treaty.
All right, cool. It's kind of a great place for activists as well, I think, being vegan and being able to, when you're feeling strong enough to go bear witness, go do that. And then when you want to help send some letters to your city council, you can do it from that angle, right? So it's nice personally to be able to balance that out too. And how's your hand? Is it going to survive your spider bite?
It's sort of like a little swollen, but I think it's getting better. I put some aloe vera on, and I took some arnica. It's a homeopathic remedy when there's a shock to your system.
Yeah.
I did that, and I did go to the drugstore, and they gave me something. I don't know. It's, yeah.
Do you have turmeric?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good for inflammation too, right? Yeah.
Thank you. I'll have some of that, and then I have my frozen blueberries, and I'm putting on my hands.
Frozen blueberries, they'll cure everything, right? That's great.
But it was really great talking to you, and thank you for raising awareness and bringing movements together. And it's great that you started as an environmentalist, because I did as well. So I can understand your route. That's where I started in the 90s, and yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Right on. Yeah. It's really great to meet you, Anita. And, maybe we can check in with you another few months, and you'll have some good news for us after COP26. Are you actually traveling to Glasgow?
I wish, but I haven't flown in like 3 years, so I'm trying not to fly.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of local people there that are going to do a fabulous job. Like, we rented 3 Airbnb because there's so many people. So
cool.
We got awesome activists who are going to be there. And we have so many things happening, like a light show and a plant-based treaty guide to Glasgow with vegan restaurants. We have plant-based treaty dancing. We have a vigil, a cow vigil. We're going to join the march. There's a worldwide march, November 6th, Saturday, November 6th. So we're going to be there in Glasgow, but also around the world. So just encourage everyone to join those marches.
And is there a place where we can participate online? Is there a YouTube channel or something where people will be live broadcasting?
Oh, yes. So first of all, like on our website, plantbasedtreaty.org, we have a take action page, and there you'll see the COP. There's a COP page. But we'll definitely be live streaming on Facebook, on YouTube. We'll be posting it on YouTube, Instagram. Like, yeah, we'll be on all the social media. But a central hub is our website, and it's under Take Action. If you go to the top page. But yeah, and we have press releases coming out all the time, and that's on our website as well under media, what people are saying and press releases. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, Anita. Take care of yourself, eh?
Thanks. Yeah, good to see you. And yeah, such a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, thank you. You too. Truly.